This time on Poll Hub, we've got good news and bad news for Democrats, and by definition in our two-party system for Republicans as well. We're digging into the results of our brand new poll with NPR on what Americans are thinking about with just over 4 weeks to Election Day. Then, if you live in a state with competitive elections this year, you've probably seen ads showing security cam videos of crimes being committed. It's part of the GOP's endgame this year, using crime as an issue against Democrats. Nothing really new there, but we've looked at the ad buys, crime stats, and of course the polls to see if the strategy could work this time around. Finally, it's our habit to end with a fun fact, and this week's is extra special because it's about habits, bad ones. Yeah, that could be fun. All right, stick around. We'll get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Maringoff.
Well, we took a little break here at the Marist poll from our competitive state polling on Senate and governor's races to clock in nationally what Americans are thinking and how they view how things are going. And what we found was a little interesting. Biden's approval rating has continued to inch up, now at 45% among those who say they will definitely vote. Among Americans overall, it's 44%, and it's the highest since last March. So we have continued to see him inch up month by month. I think what is particularly interesting is the fact that we also asked nationally about the congressional generic, where we ask all Americans who they're planning to vote for in their district for Congress, the Democrat or the Republican, which we have seen bounce along this year. Back in March, the Republicans were up above the Democrats, giving hope to the Republicans that this was going to be the significant sweep that they anticipated, and historically we have been seeing in midterm elections for the incumbent president. But since June 24th and the Supreme Court's decision on abortion, Democrats had gotten back up into the lead on that question. And this time around, the Dems have a 3-point edge in the generic, and I say an edge because it has been inching downward. This is among definite voters. And it's been inching downward since the height of the bubble in June. I think one of the things that seems very interesting is how the congressional generic and the president's approval rating, although historically has always been correlated, related to one another. One goes up, so does the other. One goes down, so does the other. This time, very, very different. What does that mean, guys, for this November?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, the gap is closer to the two. And what I found interesting in the previous polls is that the Democrat congressional candidates were running well ahead of Biden's approval rating, which sort of speaks against the traditional conventional wisdom, because this is supposed to be a bad year for the Democrats because it's their first midterm with the party in power in the White House. And what's happened is that for a variety of reasons, not too many of them being surprising, but between the Supreme Court and everything going around the attack on the Capitol, the traditional averages of the party out of power picking up to around 20, 25 seats in the House and 3 to 5 seats in the Senate, doesn't look like that's going to happen. In other words, the races are going to be far closer, and that seems to be with or without the numbers that Joe Biden is scoring. Although I will say one thing on behalf of Joe Biden: unlike Barack Obama in 2010, who sort of didn't take a very active role taking on the Tea Party during that year, and the Republicans had an enormous success in terms of winning House seats. Right now, Joe Biden is out there saying, you may not think I got a good record, but let's take a look at some of the things I've accomplished. And I think that's the best thing you can do, because people are going to be thinking about you anyway, and you might as well put your best face on it in terms of what you've done the last year and a half, 2 years.
And when you were talking about the January 6th, you were meaning the hearings that were going on during the summer.
Yeah, and everything that's been going on with Mar-a-Lago and just all the downside of Donald Trump, former president. There's an upside for him mobilizing some Republican base voters. There's a downside in him chasing away a lot of suburban women voters as a swing group. So, Donald Trump is playing it both ways. And this is hardly a referendum on Joe Biden right now because it's a referendum on both of them, which is very unusual.
I think one of the things that's interesting about polls, national polls, when there are no national races. So the races we're talking about in November are House seats, every House seat's up, a third of the Senate's up, and a bunch of governor's races too. And so I think what's really interesting in these polls, and you guys have taught me this, I didn't really realize this as a political reporter, is looking at the numbers themselves can tell you something. But there's directional stuff that can tell you kind of where things are going. And if it's going to be a wave election, there's stuff beyond just an approval rating or this generic congressional that gets you there. And I think there's a couple things that are interesting in here to me, both of which are favoring Republicans. One is this intensity edge. Who's more interested in voting? And we asked that two different ways. We asked, are you definitely voting? And then we gave a numeric scale of interest. How interested are you in the elections? And in both cases, Republicans, not by an overwhelming margin, but Republicans are more interested than Democrats. We're also seeing that in most of our state polls. We've seen that same thing where Republicans are slightly more interested in voting or more interested in the election than Democrats. The other thing is this, when we looked at this question about what are the issues are that are driving them, and inflation is the number one issue. That's been consistent across every state poll. Preserving democracy is number two, but there is a gap. There's a multi-point gap here. And when you if you assume inflation is a Republican issue, preserving democracy is a Democratic one, abortion, which is the third one, is probably a Democratic issue, and immigration is probably a Republican issue, and you add those up. And I know this isn't, the way that we do this, it's not math. But if you add it up,
well, it is math.
It's arithmetic.
Yeah, it is math.
It's arithmetic.
It's arithmetic. It's not the kind of math we do, the hot statistical stuff. But if you do that, you kind of do it back of the envelope. The issues that are more important to Americans in the aggregate are Republican-leaning issues than are Democrat. So I think those things are interesting, and that's what I'm watching for, is looking at these directional signals that we get from these other questions. Is there more of a Republican lean here than maybe some of the state polls and maybe some of the other numbers are showing?
Well, we did take a look back to 2018 and looked at that interest question as well. And overall, it is up considerably among all groups by about 10, 15, 20 points, depending upon the group. But I think your observation, Jay,
and that means a high turnout. I mean, that's the expectation is that higher interest will result in higher turnout.
So I think your observation is correct. I mean, although interest and enthusiasm is up across the board, the Republicans seem to have the edge there.
I was just going to say, we'd be remiss if we didn't point out one danger sign in all this data, and that has to do with whether voters trust the elections to be fair and accurate, and whether their losing candidate should concede or not. And this has to do with preserving democracy in its operational level. And what we do see, and I don't know if this is surprising or not, what we see is something about the preserving democracy issues which looms over the horizon potentially, because the people who are Democrats and Republicans have a very different view on whether the elections are going to be fair. Democrats are very confident, 59%. Only 25% of Republicans say they're very confident. And if your candidate loses, should they concede? Well, 68% of Democrats say yes, but only 33% of Republicans say so. So we're seeing the effects of 2020 and the fact that President Trump did not concede. If you want to talk about the democracy working, you sure want to talk about elections being fair, and you want to talk about the winners declare victory and the losers concede. So I think that was an important part of the data that we should not overlook.
Absolutely. We're talking about these midterm elections, and one of the things that if you live in a state where there's any competitive elections of any kind, you've probably seen, as we mentioned at the top, these ads on TV that are focusing on crime. Republicans have traditionally been seen as better able to handle crime by voters. This goes way back. And Republicans have often run on a law and order message. We've seen that throughout the last 4, 5, 6 decades. This is not new. They are running in this home stretch on the issue of crime. The question is, will it work this time? Is there any basis in this? So we wanted to look into the data, a couple different pieces of data. One is crime stats. One is the ad buys. Is this really a big deal for Republicans? Or are we just seeing a few of these ads in a few places? And then also what Americans think. So let's take those very quickly, and then we can talk about all this. There is evidence, according to the New York Times and others, that in the last few weeks, Republicans have put most of their money, or a lot of their money, into crime ads. That's the one that they're pushing the most. The facts are on crime. Violent crimes are down from their 2021 peaks, the last 2 years of the pandemic, which really jumped a lot. They're still significantly higher on a national level than they have been since the late 90s. So crime is up. It's down from the last 2 years, but it's up historically. Property and street crime is up from the last year, and theft and robberies are about 20% up in major cities in this first half of 2022 compared to 2020 and 2021. So crime is up. You can dice those numbers in a lot of ways, but crime is up. Polls, and then we'll get to this. September, the Monmouth poll has crime as the number 2 issue that Americans say is extremely or very important, right behind inflation. And a September New York Times Siena poll from just a couple weeks ago showed voters give the GOP a 10 percentage point edge over Democrats on crime. That's 47-37. Again, historically, that's always the case. Is this the winning issue? Is this the one they should be closing on? And will it work, Lee?
Well, I think what it also speaks to is the fact that the Republicans must feel that inflation alone is not the winning issue, because they sort of have opened up a second front here. And I think with crime, although I appreciate the statistics on the reality, I think it's also a lot about perception. And if you have that sense of crime is, the area is dangerous, and, this crime is running rampant, that's enough to affect people's voting choices. So yeah, it makes a big difference potentially, and I think it's not an accident that the Republican ads are now focusing on that. When you look at the numbers that you're just talking about, it will not only reflect the reality, but it will influence people's perception of what the crime situation is. And the whole defund the police thing, which was during Black Lives Matter, which was really never quite what it was played out to be, that's also part and parcel of this. So they're running on that as well, and the Democrats being soft on crime. It's not a new issue. I mean, you can go back to lots of elections, and it's a common argument. And the question is whether turnout among the Democrats and people who are conservative about the preserving democracy and the Supreme Court, where that can offset that. And as you say, the numbers are close, with maybe a slight edge to the Republicans in terms of people's concerns.
Yeah, well, I was going to jump in to just really also talk about the fact that crime, in a sense, is very different from the issue of the economy. The Republicans are doing incredibly well on the economy. The catch there is that there's some social issues that have mobilized Democrats. We've talked about abortion. We've talked about the hearings and the January 6th issue of democracy. There's also this sense that Trump is still kind of looming over everything. So the one thing about social issues that is a little bit different from other things like the economy is that they can be very mobilizing. And I think that if the Republicans are going to pick one issue, they did try to identify immigration, but to regain voters in the suburbs, that is not a good fit for those voters. Crime, on the other hand, is a very good fit. That is a match for those voters. It's where the battlegrounds are in many of the states that have the competitive Senate races. And so to pitch the issue of crime, which has been on the rise, and there is a perception that things are more unsafe. I think that kind of also goes along with this lack of trust that we're seeing in a lot of institutions, so that it does feed that feeling. And it is a mobilizing issue that perhaps can match the Democrats' advantage on abortion.
So is this the perfect counter to abortion, like you just said? Because abortion is driving suburban. We've seen this. We've seen registration numbers and stuff. Is this kind of the perfect flip side for Republicans to try and win in the suburbs? To push abortion out of the way. Worry about crime, don't worry about abortion.
But I must say, we know from political communications in contemporary campaigns that, you have to answer charges. You can't let them on the table. And if I were the Democrats, I'd be saying, you're worried about crime. That's what we've been talking about with gun control. That's what the problem is. Too many guns, too many shootings, too many deaths. And so, we're the ones who are trying to get in front of it. Do something to countermeasure this. Don't leave crime on the table by itself. They haven't left the economy alone. So why don't you, jump in there? And as a party, the Democrats need to say something about this because, like you say, it can be a problem politically, particularly with those voters who are going to make a big impact on the election ultimately in the fall, next couple of weeks. So we've got to do a rough segue here into the fun fact. And so I'm just going to jump in and do it because I actually enjoy the fun fact this week. Some of them I find a bit of a reach. This one is, however, I think really interesting. So here goes. 2015, courtesy of our friends at the Roper Center Archives at Cornell. It was a poll done in 2015, as I said, by 60 Minutes and Vanity Fair. And the question they asked was, which one of the following bad habits are you most likely to engage in when no one else is looking? Eating something fattening. That's the one, eating something fattening. No comma there. Watching a trashy TV show. Looking at someone who you've attracted to from head to toe, someone smoking a cigarette. I'm not reading very well today. Drinking alcohol, or texting an ex.
You don't have any bad habits, do you, Lee?
Well, I'm going with the food consumption part of my life. I think if there's a bad habit I have is that I eat most of my calories at the time you're not supposed to. As the day goes, you're supposed to have a good breakfast and then taper off as the day goes on. I have a lousy breakfast, and by 11 o'clock at night, I'm packing it away with all things that one shouldn't eat. So,
but you do that in front of everybody. It's not like you do it when people aren't looking.
No, it's all
Busted,
the wrappers
Lee.
and empty.
You're busted.
It's all the wrappers and dirty dishes that are evidence in the morning of, either a huge mouse has been unraveling things or I've been on the prowl. So anyway,
so Barb, that's one of your good habits, calling Lee out on things. Are any of these would be a bad habit that you would be likely to engage in?
I just also found it interesting that 13% didn't mention any of those, but did mention something else.
Yeah,
which
scary.
is now, was not included in this list. But
I think this is an open-ended question. Would be you'd get a lot,
and maybe
probably a lot of stuff we can't talk about. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, what's on your list?
Wouldn't want to hear. So I think out of this list, which folks were given, it's probably the eating. I mean, I've talked a lot about my ice cream habit, and everybody knows that I should be avoiding, ice cream, at least at the quantity that I prefer to eat it. So I think the kind of snacking, ice cream, chips, that sort of thing. And I don't know if it's that people aren't looking as much as if I'm, just by myself, that even if I'm working, I want something to munch on.
Mary, you got a lot of eyes in your house, so it would be hard to not have somebody see your bad habits. But which one, any of these?
Yeah, I do think that I tend to eat a lot of junk food. I do try to hide it from my kids. I'm probably not successful, and it was increased during pandemic homeschooling, where I was admittedly hiding in the basement eating chocolate bars. But that was more of a survival technique.
That was coping.
And I should point out, I did not say eating something fattening was number one on the choice at almost 40%. I don't know if I didn't point that out, but that is definitely number one.
Casey,
on the habit. Casey, what do you got?
So Casey, when the bunnies aren't watching, which of these habits do you do? She has bunnies. That's what we're talking, pet bunnies. Anyway,
I'd probably say I'm none of these, and it would be Amazon is probably the thing that
Casey.
some little doodad from Amazon.
Yeah, there
Oh,
you
that's
go.
excellent.
Now,
Yeah, that's the 2022 list,
yeah.
rather
Now,
than the 2015 list.
yeah, but Jay, you moved us around the circle here, but conveniently in your moderator role, neglected to indicate what your
Yeah. So, well, I'm one of the 13% who said none of these because I mean, I just none of these. I don't really do. If I do these things, I'm not afraid to do them in front of people. But there are things that I do that I wouldn't do in front of people. But I'm not going to talk about them in front of people. So we're done
So
with that. So the
Oh,
second. So I want to just
give
say,
it, just
yeah.
give us this, no, give us an example of something that someone else might do.
No.
you're not
You
going
can
to.
use your imaginations. So there were like 6 questions about bad habits in this poll. So we
Yeah.
just pulled out 2 of the questions. There's some other fun questions, but the second one is, which we liked, which one of the following is most likely to get you to break a bad habit? A near-death experience,
Number
an
one,
ultimatum
41%.
41%, an ultimatum from a loved one, 30%.
30%.
Several years of therapy. So the question writers were having some fun here, I think. 9%.
Yeah.
And another bad habit to replace
Okay.
it, 9%, or don't know, 12%. So we'll go around again real quick. Lee, we'll start with you. Which one of these?
Another bad habit to replace it. So the eating propensity that I have was the replacement many decades ago from smoking. So
Ah.
I was skinny
Okay.
as a rod until I gave up smoking, and I've been putting on poundage pretty much ever since because that has been my substitute for
And Barb, which one of these?
I think another habit, I don't know if it's a bad habit, but I think another habit, and it's kind of a toss up for me between that and I don't know, would a horse be a loved one? Because
Yes.
because
Oh,
an
yes.
ultimatum, because
Mhm.
definitely I have a couple of small ponies, and so if the snacking increases too much, they're going to be very unhappy
Very
carrying me
upset.
around.
Yeah.
Oh, there you
yeah.
go. I wouldn't know
That's
where
good.
that was going. You like the bill,
Yeah.
they wanted the snacks. I wasn't
So-
sure where you were going on that.
So
No,
Mary,
no.
which one of these?
These seem a little extreme, but
Yeah,
I would
right.
say another bad habit. When I was younger, I had a really bad habit of biting my nails, combined with picking my cuticles. That I continue to do, and that
Oh.
tends to replace the biting of the nail. So I would say another bad habit.
And Casey?
Yeah, I'm on the consensus of another bad habit because near-death experience only lasts so long.
So what they did, granted, yeah, there is a finite bit to that. They should have asked a good habit to replace it. I
Yeah.
mean, because
Yeah.
that is the way to stop bad habits. One of the ways that experts talk about is replace it with a good habit. And I've tried to do that with some like
With
during the
success?
pandemic. Well, yes, during the pandemic, I drank more than I drink, which I don't drink that much. But I started having a couple of glasses of wine every night with dinner instead of just a couple of nights a week. And I never drank flavored anything with meals ever. I always drink seltzer water. So I started drinking seltzer water with like something in it, like a little cranberry juice or something like that, and that fixed that. I don't know if it was a bad habit, and it may not be a good habit because I'm consuming sugar now, but I don't think that's a bad habit, replacing a bad one.
So I think people should join us next week for a renamed program, Poll Hub True Confessions. That's where we're going with this, obviously. Take care. Have a good week, folks.
Better than Poll Hub Law and Order. That one's coming.
That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them directly to @MaristPoll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it will cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as we release it.
We'll see you next time.